Hi, my name is Dr. Vastaras, and today we will talk about differences in economic systems. Let me share my slides and I will show you how we can classify countries in terms of the economic systems they have. So specifically, we will be talking about economic differences and not political differences. And let me clarify that first. So many people equate democracy with free market and authoritarianism with or dictatorship with planned economy. But technically, those two don't have to be the same. So these are two completely different dimensions. And it is true that while most of the dictatorships tend to be planned economies in some way, it doesn't have to be that way. So we will have a different block on differences in political systems. And in that block, we will talk about how democracy is different from a dictatorship. And so it's basically about how the decisions are made in that country. Is it a group of people who make those decisions through, for example, election and voting? Or is it one person or one family that makes those decisions, like a king or dictator or some other form of authoritarianism? For economic systems, the differences in economic systems, what we are discussing today, it's all about how the economy is structured. So is it a free market or is it a planned economy? Are most of the programs private or run by the government? Or it's very important to understand that we can have also capitalism versus communism. So capitalism where everything is in private hands essentially, communism where everything is owned collectively through the government, or socialism where it's kind of a mix of the two. Some things can be owned and run by the government using the taxpayers' money, and some things can be private. And so we are talking about economic differences today, not political differences. So before we get into all the details, again, I would like to stress that this is a very contentious, very difficult topic. So these days, in most countries, and certainly in the United States, people fight about these ideologies. Some people call themselves capitalists and genuinely hate socialists. And in fact, socialist has become almost a swear word or a bad word. Other people believe in socialism and don't like free market economy and believe that the free market or businesses, uncontrolled businesses, are destroying our society. So this makes talking about these issues, even theoretically, very difficult, because once you use the word socialism or capitalism, people stop thinking here and start thinking here. And so they literally close their ears and say, oh, socialism, it's so bad, or oh, capitalism, it's so bad. So I truly hope that you will rise above those emotional and ideological markers and instead will think about the kind of classifications, theory. What exactly is one and what exactly is the other, and what exactly one is not and what exactly the other one is not, right? So obviously most people, at least in my circles, like capitalism, right? And so we want, capitalism where individual initiative, rules the economy. But it's important to understand that pure capitalism doesn't really exist. Moreover, it may not even be feasible for it to exist. In fact, the only time when it existed in the free world is probably, I don't know, maybe Wild West, when there was no government at the frontier, and the economy was completely unregulated. Everybody was for myself and for my family. So it's important to understand that once some sort of collective action forms, once some sort of a government forms, and once that government imposes some sort of taxes, or rather not imposes, once people decide to all contribute to the joint pot and use that money for some form of collective programs, you sort of have some sort of socialism, at least first signs of socialism. So for example, if you have, a group of people, let's say somewhere in the wild, wild west, and they decide to pull their resources together and organize some sort of an army, or maybe, police, a local sheriff. So all of a sudden, that's not pure capitalism anymore, because everybody contributes to the salary of that sheriff, and that sheriff is basically a government-run program. So obviously it's not what we would call socialism, but it is already signs of socialism. And so the challenge here becomes, where does capitalism end? Socialism begins, and then socialism ends, and capitalism and communism begins. So what if that group of people, what if that settlement or that, collective decided to also build roads together? So everybody contributes a little bit to the common budget and use that money to build roads. Would that make them socialists? How about they decided to organize some form of a daycare, again, where everybody in the village contributes some sort of money, and that money, among other things, is used for daycare or schooling. So it's already forms of socialism, because we all contribute to this social program. And so again, I'm not talking here about how much, but most people would probably believe that some sort of organization of that kind would be beneficial. And so the question is, so at which point do we call this society a socialist society as opposed to capitalist society? What if they elect some officials, pay them a salary, and ask them to negotiate with other countries on behalf of this collective? So what if there is some sort of an international policy using the budget resources to pay those people to do it? What if they decide to all pool their resources and build some sort of a border security fence around their little piece of land, and have some sort of immigration services? There will be a guy with a gun at the entrance on the gate who will check who's coming in and who's going out. Again, everybody contributes to the common budget and hires that person, so that the person offers this social service to the society, immigration and border protection services. How about those people decide to offer some sort of a safety net for the weak and the old? They say, hey, let's all contribute a little bit throughout our life to the joint budget of our settlement. But then we will use that money if somebody, injures himself, herself, or gets old and weak and cannot care for himself, herself. Maybe instead of relying on family help in taking care of this person, what if there is no family? So we will use some budget money. So again, if that happens, is that already socialism or not yet? What if they decide to hire someone, elect one person from the group whose job will be to control safety of the products? Is this medication or poison? Is this product safe to use or not? So as you can imagine, at some point, any collective, any group of people will probably want to have this kind of joint budget and do something together, right? And so once they start doing that, technically they become a mixed economy. So they have some forms of socialism embedded in their economic system. And so it's very important to not start swearing each time you hear about some sort of collective action and joint budget, because a minimum of it, or at some level, it's probably very beneficial to the society. So the question is, at which point it becomes detrimental? And so when we try to classify countries on this continuum, so as I said, we have pure economy on one end. That's where nothing is regulated. Anyone can produce and sell whatever they want. There is absolutely no support from the government. You are completely on your own. Then you have a pure planned economy, where you have some sort of a collective communist owned, communal owned resources. And then you have a government that plans that economy in advance on behalf of the whole group. So instead of relying on the invisible hand, we try to plan it together because we all own it together. So you not only plan your own family's resources and plans and production, but for the whole country. And then obviously mixed economies, mixed models, which many would call socialist models, where some industries are regulated, like for example, maybe military, maybe banking, and some aspects are completely free. So you can open any business you want. But there may be some regulations and some oversight. Is it safe? At the very least, you need to be registered so we know who's operating in our economy. So there's things like accounting may be regulating, audit may be regulated, safety may be regulated. And the truth is that pretty much all of the countries are these mixed economies. So if I ask you, which one on this continuum is the United States? Again, many of my students, when I ask it in class, they say it's a pure pure market economy. And that's not true. In the United States, there are many services that are offered by the government. As I said, army, police, some education services, social security. So there are quite a few, interstate system, roads. So many services are offered by the government using the taxpayers' money. And so obviously the United States is not a pure free market. So you cannot produce and make and sell any product. For example, there are regulations when it comes to, for example, production of narcotics, weapons. So obviously there are some regulations and some restrictions in place. And so that makes the United States also a mixed economy, so with some signs of socialism. So on this list, obviously, the United States probably would be around B. So it's not a pure economy. It's probably less regulated than most countries, but it's definitely not an A, right? And so other countries may be more like C or D on this continuum, if we assume that A and E are extremes. So which one system is better? Again, we'll talk about ways we can try to measure that, although I will say that it's not my job here to tell which system is better. My job here is to explain what the difference is, and then maybe present some evidence from research on the topic that looked into pros and cons of each system, to what extent one benefits which areas, when it's better to have some government-run programs, when it's better to run some private programs. So we will talk about those things. You will make up your own mind. I'll just give you a framework to think about it. Now, when I teach this course in class, I start this lecture with showing my students two documentaries. They are a little old, but they make the point very well, and I will include them for my students. I have the disc specifically for this purpose so that they can watch both documentaries. For those who cannot watch it, let me explain what those documentaries are about and how I do it. So I show those two films, each about 15 minutes or so. One talks about Lincoln Electric, and the other one talks about SAS. So both of these are American companies. Lincoln Electric is headquartered somewhere Midwest. I forgot the name of the town where it's officially located, although it has facilities, production facilities all around the country. And then SAS is a company here in North Carolina, a privately owned software company. And so before I show them these two videos, I take a poll and I ask my students, what kind of country or society you would like to live in. Would you like to live in a capitalist country, free market, completely free market? You are on your own. There is little oversight, but there is little support from the collective, from the government. Or would you like to live in a socialist country where you surrender some of your maybe freedoms and you contribute to the joint budget, but in exchange, the government takes care of some of your needs. So basically takes care of some of the social needs of the society. And so when I ask that, almost all of my students, say, oh, we choose free market. And I record those answers and I say, all right, so let's put that aside for now. I want to show you two videos. And I show them these two videos about Lincoln Electric and SAS. Now, those of you who don't know, Lincoln Electric makes mainly welding machines, but also other types of electric equipment. And so this is one of those companies that has very little, how should I put it? They pay a lot, but you're on your own. So it's only piece rate compensation. You make a unit of product. If it's a good quality product, you get paid for that one. You produce more, you get paid more. You come to work to make money. You do a good job, you get a lot, high compensation. But if you get sick, you're on your own. So they don't pay you for sick days, for holidays. They only pay you for what you make. So they make much, much more than the industry average, but it's like a high wire without the safety net. So as I said, you get sick, you have to take a day off, you are on your own. So you come to work to make money and nobody cares about anything else. So your problems are your problems. And then I show the video about SAS. So SAS, now a better example today would be probably Google or Facebook. So SAS was the first company that pioneered the philosophy of taking care of your employees. So that's the company that started with first a jar of M&Ms in the office where employees could get a little candy, in the middle of the day. But then they took it to an extreme. So there is all kinds of facilities on campus where you can go to a yoga class, a basketball court, nice cafeteria for the employees, masseuse, a doctor on the side. The company did some research and they found that if an employee goes to see a doctor, the employee will be on average away from work for 2 hours. They can offer doctor services on campus for like 30 minutes. So saves company time, makes it convenient for the employees. Daycare on campus, again, very convenient for the employees, especially those who have kids, takes a lot of stresses away. So a lot of art on campus. So basically, if you've seen movies about Google or Facebook, that's what they do now. So you can literally live in that beautiful campus. The company takes care of you. The salary is decent, but not necessarily outrageously high. So, they pay roughly what, high-level, high-tech companies pay. But you get a lot of benefits. You don't have to worry about all that food and, social and healthcare and all that stuff. So the company takes care of that. And then I ask my students after we watch those two movies, I ask them, so which company would you like to work for? So if you were offered a job, let's say you major in, accounting or marketing or whatever your major is, you would be offered a job as an accountant, for example. Which of these two companies you would like to work for, or any other type of profession, equivalent type of job for one versus the other. 90%, if not 95% of my students choose SaaS or Google for that matter today, if that's a better example for you, or Facebook. And then I go back to my original poll and I say, wait a second. When I asked you if you would like to live in a society that is basically free market, you are on your own. If you succeed, great for you. If you fail, bad for you. But when I gave you a real life example, you basically chose a socialist company where they do a lot of, they basically could have paid you more instead of spending that money on all those goodies on campus. They pay you just enough, good, but not outrageously high. And you seem to like that system much better. So essentially, you're selecting a socialist company or a company that treats its employees as a socialist country. And my students are scratching their head and saying, that's interesting. Actually, yeah, you're right. I never thought about it that way. But yeah, I think I would want to work for, Google and not a sweatshop, even if the sweatshop pays me more. I want to have, wholesome life, and I want to have some safety and security in my life, and I want to have some fun in my life. So I don't want to be all about, churning out the units of production. So anyway, the point here is not so much, what is right and what is wrong. The point is that when you call it socialism and capitalism, many people think, as I said here, and act with their ideology. But when you give them a list of the actual things included in the package, people often change their opinion. And again, I'm not saying here that socialism is good or, SaaS is better than Lincoln Electric. I'm just saying that I observed that my students would drastically change their answers depending on how you frame the question and how much information about the details you give to them. So I just hope that you keep that in mind when you're making up your mind. So again, I'm not advocating one system over the other. I'm just saying that there is a little bit more to it than just, what the ideology would tell us. And so when we look at the economy continuum, here are some of the examples of free market economy countries like the United States. Most of Europe would be somewhere in the middle, so they have some governmental programs more than in the United States. And then the only country really that is still a pure centrally planned economy, that would be Cuba and North Korea. And even Cuba, obviously, now is becoming a little bit more, free market, at least moving in that direction. So North Korea may be the only one left where it's a pure market economy. So China definitely not there anymore, so moving towards a more free market. And then obviously we have all kinds of countries in the middle. The only thing that I would like to point out here, especially for my American students, is that there is also this anchoring effect. So in the United States, what I noticed is that people often talk about Canada as a socialist country. And people here often think that America is capitalist and Canada is socialist. Not true, in a sense that when you plot the whole spectrum, Canada is actually one of the most capitalist countries in a sense that, it's a very free market economy. It's true that they have socialist or socialized healthcare, but that's about it. So everything else there is pretty much like in the United States. Businesses are very free to do what they want. There is no central plan mandated by the government. There are some governmental programs like, as I said, military education, but so are in the United States. So definitely Canada is much more capitalist than just about any European country, for example, including the United Kingdom. So comparing the two, it may create an impression that one is socialist and the other one is capitalist. The truth is that both are as far on the free market spectrum as it gets, and probably more free than just about any other country on the planet. So it's very wrong to call Canadians socialists, even though they do have a little bit more socialism or more programs run by the government than the United States, notably healthcare. If you look at the whole map of the world and, to see where where different countries fall, you basically have, yes, least regulated would be the United States and Australia, maybe the United Kingdom, Canada, and much of Europe follows closely. Again, depending on which ranking you look at, some may put Canada in blue here, on the level of economic freedom the highest. Some say that it's slightly lower, but it's definitely, in the free spectrum. Now, Southern Europe tends to be a little bit more regulated, so they're slightly lower on that spectrum. And then much of Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe are kind of more on the socialist end. So the former Soviet Union camp and some countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So that just so you kind of orient yourself where we stand in the world here. Now, since you're watching this video, I have to give you a bonus. And so here is a question that probably will appear on the exam if you're taking my course. So take a second, read it, and see if you can answer it. So is the the United States, a pure free market economy? No, it's not a pure free market economy. It's definitely a free market, but not a pure case. Most countries have a mixed economy. Yes, it's true. So most countries have a mixed economy, with the exception of North Korea, that is totally planned economy. Everybody else has a mixed economy with some elements of socialism and some elements of capitalism. And it just, where they fall on the spectrum, that's the question. So let's talk about the pros and cons of each system and, when one is better than the other. So we talked about the examples, and we don't really have many examples of centrally planned economies anymore, with the exceptions of maybe like the Soviet Union that vanished, maybe China before it became more open, maybe Cuba a little bit before it became more open, and North Korea would be the only one. But yes, those are the countries where welfare of the group is put above the economic personal freedom, right? So economic equality and social equality is the goal in the pure case. So what are the opponents' arguments against the planned economy? I mean, if I ask you, you probably can give it to me. It's quite obvious. The biggest concern with this economy is that we all work, but the government takes the money from us and redistributes the money as it sees fit. And often that takes incentive away to work hard. If I work and keep everything that I make, I work hard. If I work and the government takes all or most of it, I have no incentive to work hard. And it makes perfect sense that it's a negative consequence of the system. So people have no incentive not only to work hard, but to start their own business. Entrepreneurship becomes unnecessary because you cannot make profits. The government will take that away. So obviously it's, it's a problem. I did happen to have experience with a planned economy. I was born in what used to be the Soviet Union, and I did catch a few years of that system. And yes, I attest that it didn't provide any incentives to work hard. Salaries were fixed pretty much. It was a planned economy, and so all engineers of a certain category would basically make the same money. And so you show up to work every day, you work hard, and you don't really get anything extra. We had those, what they called employment books. It's almost like a transcript for a student where they record everything you did, just like they record here in transcripts, all the courses you took. And so my father had quite a few inventions and patents, and so they would put that in that book, right? So it's recorded there. So places he worked, achievements he had, and in many cases, the invention would allow the company, he was an engineer, built like electrical systems. And so one of those patents I remember was that he devised a better way to wire a factory. And so it saved like huge amounts of money. And he got a little bonus for that. It was like something like, equivalent of basically a bus ride. It's like $3 in today's money, like, outrageous. So why would you? And then again, you don't show up for work, you don't do much, you still get the same pay. And in many cases, you wouldn't be even fired because they, strive towards full employment. And so in many cases, firing employees is not even possible. Everybody must be employed. So the only people who can make a little bit more than the fixed salary are people who either work in a company where it's a piece rate, like, some sort of a production where you work with, I don't know, you make some units of something and they pay you per unit. And so if you make more of those units of work, you can actually make a little bit more money. And in fact, sometimes it was a little outrageous and, absurd, where a welder or an electrician or a carpenter could make actually more than the manager of the company, because the carpenter is paid for every, I don't know, chair that he makes. And so if he works hard, he actually can make a little bit more if that's how his salary is set up. Whereas the manager of the plant has a fixed salary, and so sometimes there were those kinds of problems. But again, in most cases, it didn't really make much difference, and it was a fixed salary. The only other way that people could get richer is stealing or black market. And stealing was rampant in the Soviet Union. When I came to the United States for the first time, the type of stores that surprised me most was, I'm not sure if you can guess it, but I was most surprised to see stores like the Home Depot. I was very surprised because I was, what you mean? Like, you go to a store to buy nails and to buy lumber? I mean, if in the Soviet Union you need that, you just go to the nearest construction site, you give a little, like a bottle of vodka to the guy who is the, working there, or manager or guard, and he just gives you what you need. So that was a very common way. So that's how people sort of, made a little extra money. So they would sell some company property, they would, bribe each other, and that's essentially, yeah. And it was almost not frowned upon because everybody was doing it, and everybody understood that without, taking something from your work, you wouldn't be able to survive. So it was almost like, unspoken additional supplementary pay to your, salary. So, and black market, it was illegal to buy and sell things, but sometimes you could. And so, for example, a car used cost much more than a new one, because a new one you have to sometimes wait for like something like 7 or 8 years before you get that product. And so if you have a used car that you're willing to sell, and you can buy one today used, or wait for 8 years to buy a new one, obviously many people would be willing to pay more to get it now, even if it's an older car. There was this joke that President Reagan told decades ago. He says about this fellow who has some problems with plumbing. A fellow who wants to buy a car. And so he applies, you have to apply to get a car. And, when he makes the payment, the clerk tells him, okay, come back in 8 years to get your car. And the guy says, when exactly? And he says, well, on this day. He gives him a date. And the fellow asks, so should I come in the morning or afternoon? And the clerk looks at him and says, what difference does it make? It's like 8 years from now. And the guy says, well, I have a plumber visiting me in the morning, so I would prefer afternoon. Joke, but that's basically how it was. So the only way that really motivated people to work harder were those motivational posters, like they had those 5-year plans. And so this poster here says, let's do a 5-year plan in 4 years. So other problems are that, when you have a planned economy, you sort of take the freedom away from the people. And that's counter our human nature. So we don't want to, be owned by the government. We want to make our own decisions. That's how we evolved. So if you want to have some sort of a planned economy, you first normally have to confiscate them, private property. And it had never happened without blood. So again, Soviet Union, any other country, usually there was a war, revolution. So definitely not a very good system. And so again, my native Ukraine went through a lot of trouble in the first 1817 eastern part, then the 30s in the 30s the western part of Ukraine. So somehow socialism, it's not bad or good, but if you believe in that system and want to build it, usually it's a little difficult to build. Although again, I suppose it can happen gradually. So we see more and more governmental programs in just about any country. So I guess if you give it enough time and if you support that system, maybe some form of planned economy can emerge naturally, but historically at least it's been usually a result of bloodshed. Now, one of the reasons also that planned economy is a problem is because people have a limited ability to plan. If you ask a group of people, even if it's a group of very smart people, to plan an entire economy for a country, they inevitably will make mistakes. They will simplify. They will, it's hard. You will end up with some products overproduced and some underproduced. And just like in the former Soviet Union, there will be long lines, queues, to buy products. They will walk in a store, and you will see shelves and shelves packed with one product, like some sort of cookies, for example, just because they planned more demand for those cookies than really is, and so they overproduce that product, but then anything else may be in short supply. In the Soviet Union, in fact, when you walk on the street and you see a group of people queuing up for something, you get in the queue even before you know what's on sale, because everything was in short supply. And so, as I said, the reason for that is not even because this system is incapable of producing products. It sure is. The problem is that in many cases, when you plan demand for products in advance, you're bound to make mistakes. Plus, as I said, often that leads also to oversimplification. In the Soviet Union, we had a very limited assortment of products, like for example, I don't know, underwear. There were literally like a couple of types for men, blue, black, and I think they were white. And that's it. Good quality, good price, no problem. But I mean, you cannot, if you're human and you have to plan the economy for 5 years in advance for the whole country, you obviously try to minimize the number of items that you have to keep in your head. And so obviously, that's essentially a negative. When I do this class with my students, I show them this video. So let me see if I can show it to you here. But it's one of those videos that shows how people have problems with, planning and executing complex tasks. So let me share my screen here. And I hope it will work well. So let me get to my video. So if you see my screen, you probably have heard about this experiment and you probably have seen it, but try to count how many passes the team in white makes in this video. So I'm not sure if you know the answer, and I will reveal you the answer in a second, but watch this. So the correct answer was 14, but the question is, did you see the gorilla, right? And so in this video, if you missed it, people were tossing the balls, right? And then at some point, a gorilla entered the picture, and you will see it in a second. See, there is a gorilla here right in the middle. The gorilla tries to attract your attention, and then the gorilla moves forward. And so what happens in this video, most people, or in this experiment, most people are unable to perceive the gorilla. So they focus on the balls, and as a result, they miss the gorilla. And so the problem here is that if you cannot see the gorilla in a simple experiment like this, what makes you think that you can plan an economy of an entire country way in advance? History shows that you can't. And so again, here, recognize that when we talk about a pure planned economy, we're talking about communism. Again, doesn't really exist anywhere other than North Korea now. But again, the more programs you outsource from the invisible hand of the free market to humans, the more likely mistakes will be made, and some products will be produced in insufficient quantity, or too many of them, or other problems will occur. So another problem also, and by the way, here is another video, another example that I use and show my students. Can you count all of the F's in the following passage? Take a second, let's see if you can count all of the F's in the following passage. How many did you count? So most people see 3 or 4. The truth is that there are 6. So most people don't perceive F's in the words like off. So let me go back here and let's see if you saw only F, F, and there was somewhere else where people see, or did you also spot off these ones, right? So most people miss those these words of, and off, and so make that sort of mistake. Again, simple task, but if you can miss F's in one sentence, how many problems or how many things will you miss if you try to plan the economy of the whole country, right? So, but the biggest problem probably is that we live in a globalized world. In these days, we buy things globally, we sell things globally, and even if you could live in an isolated system and plan it perfectly in your own country, chances are that it would be very hard for you. Oops, sorry, I think doesn't matter. Chances are that it will be very hard for you to plan what other countries will do. What if oil goes up in price and it's something you don't control? What if your suppliers will, I don't know, go bankrupt in a different country? Or what if your consumers, they have an economic downturn and you plan that you will make this product and sell it to them, but they'll no longer want to buy it from you? So you can control your own country, but in many cases you cannot control what happens in other countries. And so that obviously greatly limits your capacity of, to plan in advance the economy of your country. And unless it's a purely isolated society like North Korea, you just can't. And even North Korea, evidently, even though it's an isolated society, they still cannot do it very well, right? So there are some arguments that the supporters do for planned economy. So, for example, make for planned economy. Many experts say, well, planned economy allows you to run a whole country as one coherent machine. It's relatively easy to implement change. You just tell what people need to do. And if you're planning to develop some new products or new programs, it's much easier to do it when you have a planned economy. For example, China has decided to be a leader in, for example, electric automobiles. And today, China makes more electric vehicles than apparently the rest of the world combined. So they just made the decision and they do it. Likewise, China decided to build new industrial cities, and so they do it on a large scale using governmental funds, and they seem to be succeeding at that. In fact, when you look at China, for example, a relatively planned economy, they have those 5-year plans and everything. They're growing faster than, for example, free market economies like the United States or much of Europe. So again, partly due to the ability to run the whole economy as a coherent machine, implement the necessary changes and programs. We're yet to see if it's going to make them as good or better than free market countries, but at least, there are some signs of pretty good changes here. So other developing countries that have a free economy, like maybe Brazil or maybe some African countries, don't seem to be as successful as the more planned economy of, for example, China. Obviously, so it allows you to have a more long-term focus. Presumably, they don't have unemployment. China does, but again, it's not a pure planned economy. But in the Soviet Union, there was no unemployment. So they just look at the number of people we have, 150 million. Okay, let's plan it so that 150 million jobs will exist. And in fact, it was illegal to have no job. They would forcefully put you to work. Again, is it worth it? I don't know. Probably not in my opinion. But if you believe that unemployment is bad, well, here is a solution. No inflation. If you don't like inflation, obviously planned economy is good. They plan the prices, they plan the demand, the prices stay fixed, and that's it. In fact, let me show you the slide here. I took some pictures when I was visiting my parents a couple of years ago. These are dumbbells for workout. And as you can see, the price of this unit was 57 cents. So what was very cheap, by the way. Yes, it's, in today's money, I'm not sure how much it would be in dollars, but it was cheap, like $1 maybe or so. And so the price was not only set, it was literally ingrained in metal. Like this unit, this product, sold anywhere in the country at any time, that's exactly how much it would cost. And in fact, when people from the former Soviet Union get together, we are still playing this game where, do you remember how much a product like this cost? All my life, for example, an ice cream was 22 cents. A cup of tomato juice was 11 cents. Like many of these things, it was like for decades, exactly precisely the same price everywhere. So here are more examples. That's a battery for something. So $9.25 fixed. That's a garlic, squisher, $2. As you can see, they were literally produced from the factory and the price was the same forever and ever. So another problem with this system is, or supporters would say, that when you have a free market economy, sometimes you may have things that many people would say are unethical or are, how should I put it, strange. So, for example, a person here in Greensboro, in the town where we are, one person may be taking his or her dog to a spa to get a massage, while another person's child goes to bed hungry. And I don't know how to respond to that. I mean, I would say, well, the person who made a lot of money, worked hard, the person has the right to treat his dog to a spa. But then again, we are all humans, and in most religions, at least, all humans are equal in the eyes of God. And that child who goes to bed hungry, it just seems it's unethical and unfair. And it happens. I mean, in the United States, it's true that some people, go to bed hungry. So would it be maybe more socially responsible, beneficial, if maybe some of those resources were redistributed in a way that the hungry child gets some, I don't know, milk before going to bed? I don't know. I mean, I'm not advocating that. And I know that it's a slippery slope. You start with caring about one child at the expense of somebody, richest person dog. And before you know it, you end up with the Soviet Union. So I'm not advocating it for, by any means. But it does seem to me that when you have a completely unregulated capitalism, some of those things that many of us would call unfair or not economically or not societally feasible may be happening. And so I'm not sure, how to respond to that, but that seems to be an issue. Likewise, it is for me, in my selfish interest, that as many people in this society get educated and become productive members of the society. And it is, I don't want to deal with people on the streets who have no education and cannot make any money. And so I don't know, some proponents would say, well, maybe then we should plan on offering free education, at least maybe elementary school. And I don't know, maybe we should. But, if it's a completely unregulated free market, we may end up in a system where some people just will not have an equal start. If you happen to be born in a poor family, you will never have the money to get decent education, and as a result, never have the opportunity to become the next Einstein or Henry Ford or whatever. And so some people would say, well, in a planned economy, it's not that you are taking money from the rich, giving it to the poor. It just you give more people an opportunity to become a productive member of a society, so I don't have to pay for their prison or for their health care later on, so that they can make enough money for themselves. But if you are born in that poor background, you may not have that opportunity. Again, not sure which way is better, but it's a question that we should consider. And some of the proponents of a planned economy say, yeah, maybe we should plan for some of those things. Maybe we should not leave them completely unchecked. Here's another question that is likely to appear on the exam. Let's see if you would know the answer. So does planned economy distribute wealth more evenly? Yes. Is it good? I don't know. But more evenly? Yes. Lower unemployment? No inflation? Yes. Again, not sure if it's a good thing, but yes. Easier to implement change? Yes. Less fluctuation in economic cycle? By the way, I forgot to say about that. Yes. When you plan the economy long term, there would be no booms and busts. Everything just follows a plan, a straight line. So all of these are true. Yes, all of these are true. So none of these is none of these is our own answer. Again, I'm not saying that it's a correct policy. I'm just saying that the proponents are saying that thing. When we talk about free market economy, it's basically the opposite, right? So it's free enterprise, free choice, price flexibility. Enterprise assumes all risk at their own risk. And so the supporters' arguments would be obviously the opposite of what we just said. So strong incentives to put in a lot of effort, take risk, open your own firm. So we're talking here about the invisible hand of the free market. And it's wonderful. It's hard to argue against this argument. When we look at the data and try to see how economic freedom correlates with wealth, again, the truth is that the freer the economy, the wealthier are the people. So we can be talking all day long about the necessity to support the poor people and give that milk to the poor child and take it from the rich person's dog. But the truth is that historically, more free economies were producing more products, and so even for the poor people including. And so data shows that free economy just works better. So that's a very strong argument. But then the opponents would say the opposite. Well, sometimes it's not free. I mean, sometimes it's not fair. The same example that we just gave. Sometimes corporations, when unchecked, they can take advantage of the consumers. They can pollute the environment. They can sell bad products. So anything and everything in the pursuit of profits. And the truth is that to some extent that is also true. So we've had problems with honesty, like Enron, so defrauded many, many people, investors and consumers and its own employees. And looking back, we wish there were some sort of checks in place. Environmental hazards, Monsanto, for example, had been fined many times and still keeps breaking the law and keeps polluting our water and air. And imagine how much worse would it been if there were no Food and Drug Administration or Environmental Protection Agency. I can imagine that there would be more pollution going on and more problems with products of the quality of the products. Again, in the United States, in that respect, there are some social programs in place, in a sense, governmental programs and oversight. So promotion of harmful products and addictive products. Again, junk food, tobacco, energy drinks. Again, I'm not saying that they're all bad, but for example, most of you would probably not want to have like gambling slots in daycares, right, or high schools. Most of you probably would not want heavy drugs to be sold in vending machines in high schools. So you would say, yeah, we want to limit that. But if the economy was completely unregulated, no doubt that there would be companies willing to sell cocaine or whatever, I don't know what the strongest drugs are, in, for example, high schools. So we want some restriction, some oversight. And so in a pure free market economy, at least in the pure model, those kinds of oversights would be absent and potentially could lead to all kinds of problems. If we rely on free market to offer, programs and products to the market, sometimes there is a delay. Again, some of the biggest achievements, including in the United States, were actually done through the governmental programs, like the person on the moon. It was a NASA government-funded program, so it was basically a socialist program, in a sense that we all chipped in the form of taxes. Well, I didn't live at that time in this country, so I didn't chip in, but you did. At that time, my taxes were going to the space program of the Soviet Union. Again, is it good? Is the private programs like SpaceX or Virgin Galactic better? Possibly. I don't know. I'm not here to judge. But some of the biggest programs and products were delivered only because it was a centrally planned program. So if the Soviet Union, China, European Space Agency, and NASA were not supported by the government, there is a good chance we would still not have satellites in space. Again, is it worth it? I don't know. I'm just pointing out that, inconsistency. And we talked about, things like green energy. Again, if you like it, if you believe in it, it seems like planned economies like China are actually doing a better job than the free economies like the United States. Again, we're yet to see if it's going to, if that gap is going to be sustainable, if China will continue to lead the world. Very possible they will not. But so far, they've been actually doing better than most. So, and then at the same time, we know that the US government under Obama was trying to support some of those programs, many successes, but many failures. Like, for example, some of the money went to, this company, Solentra. And so they took the money and went bankrupt. But then again, much of the money went to the automotive companies, Chrysler and GM, and it's a success story. They were on the brink of bankruptcy, and with our money, with the bailout package, they were able to get themselves back on track and restructure, and actually did well. So I don't know, seems like an example of socialism doing something good. Banks, they got a bailout. Again, some people believe it was a bad idea, but it could have been much worse than what we experienced in 2009 and 10 without the bailout. So it seems like a governmental program did something good there. Again, I'm not here to judge. I'm just saying that it seems like there were some positive things from that. Anyway, let's do one more question, one that appears likely to appear on the exam. Let's see if you can answer it, and we'll move on. So what are the disadvantages of the free market economy according to the opponents of the free market economy? Can some resources be misdirected? Yes. Can there be a lag between demand and supply? Well, historically, smaller than in planned economies, but in theory, yes, it can be. Is it susceptible to economic cycles, booms and busts? Oh, yes. We had the Great Depression, the Great Recession, so the dot-com bubbles, so obviously it's possible. Does a free market economy provide a strong interest to put profits before public interest? Oh, for sure. We see a lot of examples. So all of those are true. Again, it doesn't mean that the free market economy is a problem, but it does, it's not a perfect system, and some of these are fair arguments about its limitations. So mixed economy, when there are both systems in place, well, historically that seems to work best. As I said, almost pretty much all countries on this planet are mixed economies, and it's not incidental. Through trial and error, we did come to the conclusion that some programs should be managed by the government. The question is only how many and to what extent, and so that's where the argument is. So we do believe that some should be, we just don't know where we need to stop. And so if I were to ask you, if there is a need for government intervention, at least somewhere, what would you regulate? Again, here are some of the examples of the programs that most people believe should be regulated. Like, for example, narcotics. Again, some people believe that they shouldn't be. Libertarians believe that there should be no restriction. But then again, I believe even the most hardcore libertarians wouldn't want to see cocaine sold in high schools, for example, in vending machines. Or I don't know, some other hard drugs. So even there, they would say there should be some sort of regulation, right? Honest advertisement, again, probably most people would agree that there should be some governmental oversight. We don't want, companies to lie to us and, sell snake oil as cancer cure. Again, probably there should be some sort of government oversight over those kinds of things. Healthcare, I don't know. Many people believe that it should be a governmental program because when it comes to our health, if you leave it completely unregulated, again, too many bad things can happen. Again, I'm not saying that it's a good problem. I probably would kind of prefer a little bit more freedom in healthcare system. But then again, if you look at life expectancy and if you look at quality of healthcare, it seems like countries like Singapore, like Japan, like Germany, like Canada, they have longer life expectancy, people get sick less, and they spend much, much less per capita on healthcare than, for example, the United States does. So when you look at the numbers and indicators, it actually seems like they must be doing something right because they have better metrics. So I don't know. Education. Do you believe that elementary school should all be private? I don't know. That's a question to talk about. Social programs, defense, army, military. So I don't know the answers. I'm just saying that it's something to think about. So when we believe that capitalism is the way to go or socialism, in most cases, most of us still probably think some sort of a mixed model in mind. They just don't, agree on where exactly it should stop. So what should government at the very least regulate? Well, when you look at the expert opinions, they believe that government should probably have some antitrust laws and enforce them, because if you leave free market completely unregulated, you may end up with monopolies. And historically, that's what happens in most economies. And so at the very least, there must be some governmental intervention to ensure that it's a free market economy and not a monopoly. Property rights, same thing. So if you leave the economy completely unregulated, all kinds of things can happen to property rights. And so you probably want to have some institutions in place that make sure that your ideas are not stolen, that your intellectual property is protected, because otherwise people would not have an incentive to develop new products. Everything would be stolen. So the government should be involved in some way in protecting those kinds of things. Physical assets, intellectual assets. If it's a wild, wild west, it's not a good stimulation for growth. You want your ideas, your patents, your product designs, your brand names to be protected, right? So if you leave it unregulated, counterfeits and industrial espionage can literally take away any incentive to innovate. Fiscal and political stability. Again, you probably want to have some sort of central bank in place. You don't want any private company to be allowed to print money, right? So you want to have some institution in place that essentially prints money and regulates, interest rates and things like that. Again, it's not something that is how should I put it, that you would like to outsource to private institutions. In the United States, in fact, many people believe that even Federal Reserve is too private, and so it should be even more government, like more under control of the elected officials. But then again, you don't want money to be printable by anyone, so you want it to be under the government control completely. And finally, probably defense. Again, you want those programs to be run by the government. I'm not sure if you want to make your army completely private. You probably want your army, police force to be under the control of the local or federal governments or whatever structure the country has. So I guess I would stop here. I hope you better understand now the topic, and when next time you have to make your own decision what kind of system you like, or when you argue with your friends about what system is better, at least you know what to look for and have this framework to analyze this issue. All right, I'll stop here.